Today on BRStv, we're gonna clean up this tank. Hi guys, my name is Ryan. Welcome to another week of the BRS 160, where every week we do our best to help you guys, members of the reefing community, enjoy your tanks and find new ways to explore the hobby. We do that by following the setup and progression of this 160-gallon reef tank. Today we're going to add some new livestock to the tank, with the primary focus being the cleanup crew. We're going to share some information on the purpose of a cleanup crew, different approaches to this, details on some popular livestock choices, and a few tips you probably haven't considered before. Before we get too far, we need to share some disappointing news. The firefish we added in a previous week didn't make it. It's always difficult to know why some fish just don't do well, doubly so in a situation like this with a large, well-cycled tank that has constant ammonia monitoring, no aggressive tank mates, or obvious signs of illness or parasites on the fish themselves. End of the day, we couldn't identify anything wrong with the system. We did a 100% water change to provide us with a bit of peace of mind, and added Fang and Sir Chomsalot to the tank. Some of you may remember Fang and Sir Chomsalot from the How to Set Up a Saltwater Aquarium series we did back in 2011. They've since received well-deserved names from their desire to bite any hand that enters their domain. These little guys have been with us a long time and made the rounds here with a handful of different tanks at BRS. Their current owner just moved to Florida, so it just seemed like it was meant to be that they become the star of the show in the BRS 160 as well. I think all of us, the BRS team, BRS community, Fang and Sir Chomsalot, have come a long way since 2011, and I'm pretty excited to see them here, even though it means I'm going to get bit quite frequently. So on to today's topic with cleanup crews. What exactly is a cleanup crew's purpose in the tank? The name suggests, and common perception is adding livestock, which is going to help keep your tank clean by eating algae, detritus, or other unwanted pests. Reefers also like adding diversity to the tank with crabs, stars, shrimp, and snails. However, these two contradictory desires are really at odds with each other in ways most reefers don't fully understand. I think it's really important to point out the break in the road here between attempting to maintain a healthy population of snails, crabs, and other cleaners in the reef tank that have the side benefit of keeping algae and other pests in check, and attempting to use them with the sole purpose of algae control, because the cleanup crew methodology is commonly really misunderstood and more often than not results in the exact opposite results the reefer intended in both of these cases. We're going to look at this from two vantage points, starting with how to introduce, build, and maintain a cleanup crew in a brand new tank, as well as from the vantage point of using them to help contain and reduce an existing outbreak. Let's start with a newer tank's cleanup crew. In this case, most reefers would add snails, crabs, and other livestock because they want to maintain these cool little critters long term, as well as keep algae and other pests at bay. Here's the thing, it's all too common for companies and even other reefers to promote tank cleaner packages, which have a strong potential to have the exact opposite effect of killing the creatures you're taking care of, as well as polluting the water and promoting nuisance algae growth. This is primarily because cleanup crew packages common to our industry often state that you need 200 or 300 crabs and 100 plus snails for a tank like the BRS 160. Well, a lot of reefers, including myself, have followed that advice at one point or another. Many reefers have learned from that experience and wouldn't do it again because the survivability of that many new tank inhabitants is not very high. In this case, if we added upwards of 400 hungry little mouths to this tank and maintain the only source of food, which is currently just a half a cube a day of frozen mysis we feed the fish, you don't have to be a marine biologist to understand that a brand new tank and a small amount of food like this just isn't going to be enough food to support that type of population, especially those that are highly dependent on fresh algae growth. The few pieces of mysis the fish don't eat will likely be scavenged by lucky members of the cleanup crew. The pieces that are not found, as well as the biological waste from the fish and other creatures that eat the food, will break down into nutrients like nitrogen and phosphate, critical for plant and algae growth. The new algae growth will go on to feed some portion of the 400 critters you just added, but most are going to starve in this environment. So here's a conundrum. This half a cube of food, including everything it breaks down into, and resulting additional food sources is not even close to enough nutrients for these 400 little mouths. So to help make sure these guys stay healthy, you're either going to have to start adding more food and or reduce water changes to let the nutrient levels rise up and support more algae growth as a food source, which is absolutely counterintuitive to trying to maintain a low nutrient tank and fend off algae. So what happens if you don't feed them appropriately and just left them to fend for themselves? Well, then the 400 little mouths that are supposed to be preventing the spread of algae in your tank start to become the nutrient source for the algae growth they're supposed to be preventing. If the snails and crabs are unable to locate food in the tank, they're going to start eating each other, particularly the crabs going after the snails, as well as consuming the fat and protein stores within their own bodies to survive. Consuming themselves or each other produces unwelcome nutrients as waste, very similar to if they were consuming actual food. So if you don't plan on keeping them alive, more or less each one of these little guys are nutrient batteries for the tank. As they slowly starve to death, they add nutrients from eating themselves or each other to the tank. Eventually, many die of starvation, at which point basically all the nutrients this organism has ever consumed and stored in its tissue is broken down and released into the tank, feeding more algae growth. There's some additional lesser known elements here. Many of these critters simply don't do very well in the aquarium. Margarita snails almost always have very short-lived lives because they come from cooler waters and don't do well in warm aquariums. Popular turbo snails can also have fairly short lifespans in the aquarium if they're collected from subtropical locations like the shores of California. There are Mexican variations of turbo snails that do much better, but it's difficult for the average hobbyist to know where they came from. There are also all kinds of starfish, crabs, snails, cucumbers, shrimp, urchins, and other critters, some of which that just don't do well in aquariums, even more so when there's heavy competition for their only food source or they're under attack from other hungry tank mates. When they die, they will result in increased nutrients in the tank and promote algae growth. It's pretty hard to count every crab and snail, but I'd say a vast majority of reefers who had hundreds of these little critters when they start a brand new tank in hopes of preventing algae growth end up with a small fraction of them alive in a year's time and a lot of unwanted nutrients and potentially algae issues. Even if you're okay with that, consider your cleanup crew disposable elements in the tank and buy refill or replenisher packs to replace the dead ones. You should absolutely consider how many nutrients all of these little corpses are adding to the tank and how that might really be the cause of many of your issues in the first place and not the solution. End of story, everyone has their own opinion on this type of thing, and how many snails and crabs you need is really based on your individual experiences, but I will say the advice that you need 1 to 2 hermits and 1 snail per gallon of reef tank is not based on keeping these things alive or maintaining a low nutrient tank that naturally prevents algae growth to begin with. The fact that most of the huge packages like this also sell replenisher packs right next to them tend to indicate that everyone understands that most tanks are not going to support this many mouths naturally, or the livestock included in the kit has a very high mortality rate. Net result is while these mouths might scavenge a lot of algae and keep the tank clean, it isn't a good method of reducing nutrients out of the tank, which is the larger cause of the real issue. It also doesn't fit a mindset that everything in the tank is really a pet or a member of the household. Fact is, livestock is going to die on occasion, but a lot of them are going to die in the wild as well, so we don't need to overwhelm ourselves with guilt, but we should try to treat the animals well and at least attempt to keep them alive. Regardless of your position on that, if you treat the tank with respect, you'll likely be a more successful reefer in general. So if 1 snail per gallon is too many for a tank, particularly a brand new tank with no algae and very little nutrients, what number should we shoot for? Keep in mind these guys are not supposed to be the primary component of algae control. They're really supposed to function as a secondary component to an overall plan to prevent algae, which has to include proper feeding, husbandry, and solid maintenance like water changes and skimmer upkeep. If the only barrier preventing you from having a major algae outbreak is you have an immense amount of mouths just barely eating algae faster than your tank can produce it, I can guarantee you're going to run into some pretty major issues sooner or later. So with that said, we're going to make a recommendation that is much closer to 1 snail per 10 gallons of water. Keep in mind that if you have a robust system that gets fed a ton, your tank might support more, but the concept should always be to match the amount of snails to the amount of available food. I also don't think a simple rule like that covers the entire picture. We need to think about habitat and type of food source as well. For instance, trochus snails spend a lot of time on the glass or rock surface, which makes that their primary habitat, and algae, diatoms, and cyano their primary food source. Nassarius snails spend most of their time stirring things up under the sand, eating detritus, waste, and uneaten foods. Cerus snails can be found all over the tank, but most often on top of the sand or substrate eating cyano, diatoms, and algae, so I try to get a mix of different snails that spend most of their time in different areas of the tank. So the big question is, does 1 snail per 10 gallons mean total snails or specific to each type of snail? Well, keep in mind that these rules are basically just rules of thumb, so a really established tank that gets fed a lot could likely sustain 16 of each type of snail in this 160-gallon reef tank. However, with a brand new tank like this, I'm probably going to start with a third to half of that and increase the volume as I increase the food source. So what about small hermit crabs like the blue leg? I think it's a judgment call here, but I'd likely shoot for the same volume with 1 per 10 gallons. The thing about hermits is while they do go after certain types of algae, cyano, and various waste in the tank, when that food supply is scarce, they're very likely to kill tank mates like snails, or in rare cases even go after certain types of corals. As they grow, they'll also absolutely kill snails for their shells. If you want to keep hundreds of hermits in the tank, you're going to have to replace the snails frequently and likely increase the feeding substantially to maintain a proper food source for that volume of tank inhabitants. In more cases than not, the few hundred you add will dwindle to a much more stable number, probably closer to that 1 or 2 per 10 gallons. Outside of that, there are a ton of little critters like various stars, shrimp, other crab types, sea slugs, urchins, and cucumbers, which can all help keep the tank clean as well. For the most part, I'd say they're all optional, and I'd only add them to the tank because you're interested in keeping it in the tank rather than what it can do for the tank. Couple notables, urchins in particular can be really effective at removing stubborn algae patches. However, they tend to drag corals around and the spines are super painful if you ever get stuck by one. Emerald crabs are a great idea because almost all of you are doomed to encounter bubble algae at some point in your reefing career. Emerald crabs can often keep this issue at bay and you may never even know you have bubble algae. However, like other crabs, if they don't get enough to eat, they'll likely go after other livestock. Same thing can be said of peppermint shrimp. Some species will eat aptasia, and a good idea to have in the tank prior to the problem rather than after. They may just completely prevent an issue no one wants to deal with. However, if there isn't enough food, they will go after tank mates and in some cases corals. Lastly, all kinds of fish should be considered part of your cleanup crew as well. Tangs, rabbitfish, dwarf angels, and blennies are aggressive algae eaters. I've seen many cases where a single tang is effectively hiding a nutrient issue in a tank because they're so aggressive about finding and eating all of the algae in the tank. I personally think fish like tangs are likely the most effective member of a cleanup crew. Be aware that all of these options have the potential to nip at or even eat corals if you let them go hungry long enough, and once they have a taste for corals, it's over. Sand sifting gobies are one of the coolest ways to keep your sand turned over, clean and free of cyano or detritus. I will say they don't do well in newer tanks, and by don't do well, I mean probably waste away and die if there isn't an established microfauna population in the sand or a significant amount of food or waste in the sand. For instance, we have a thriving diamondback goby in our clown harem tank, but that tank's been up for a year before we added him. There's also a ridiculous amount of food added to that tank every day and 30 fishes worth of waste settling out in the sand. One last piece of this I want to add as a component of your cleanup crew is a healthy microfauna population like copepods and amphipods that will process waste throughout the entire tank, and many reefers theorize consume algae before it has a chance to take hold or spread. I can't confirm this claim, but I do see it as one of the many advantages associated with maintaining a thriving refugium designed to increase microfauna populations. Okay, time to move on to the second vantage point associated with using a cleanup crew, which is to help with an established algae outbreak. You can absolutely use crabs, snails, fish, and sea slugs to help with your problem, but only if you acknowledge that this isn't a cure, and the reason you're having this problem is because you're likely feeding too much food, not exporting enough waste with water changes or your skimmer, or you're overlighting the tank with intensity or the wrong spectrum. These are the real causes in most cases. The cleanup crew is just treating a symptom of the real issue. That means once the critters eat the algae or all the available food source in the tank, you need to remove them before they die and release all those nutrients back into the tank. That means give them to a friend, try and get some credit from a local fish store, or even just give them back to the store for free when you're done with them. As unattractive as giving them away for free sounds, it's better than letting them die, produce nutrients, and feeding an algae growth issue you just solved. My best advice for anyone trying to fight an active algae outbreak like this is physically remove as much as possible by hand to get the organic matter and nutrients out of the tank permanently. Killing algae or letting it get eaten may help with the visible issue, but the nutrients are still in the tank. After removing as much as possible by hand, we suggest a string of 5 or 6 large 30% water changes a couple days apart, which basically removes 100% of the water and the nutrients it contains, and then take a long hard look at your feeding, lighting, and maintenance habits. If that doesn't work, try some nutrient removal medias like GFO, a large but temporary cleanup crew, or try something new like a more permanent approach to maintaining an ultra-low nutrient system like Zeovit, which almost never has major nutrient or algae issues. So what do we do with the BRS 160? Based on what we described above, we added a few hermits to each rock pile, 6 or 7 Saris snails, about the same nassarius, and around 10 astrius snails split up between the glass and various rock piles. I will say if they'd been available, I would have picked up trochus snails rather than the astrius because the BRS team here has had a lot more success with them. This photo is a demonstration Chad produced of how trochus snails perform versus the more popular turbo species of snails from Mexico. Trochus can also flip themselves over fairly easy, and we've seen them successfully reproduce themselves in an aquarium environment, which just makes them cooler as well. As soon as I see some trochus available at my supplier, I'll probably swap out the astrius with trochus and give the astrius away. We also added a single emerald crab to each rock structure. Not only will they keep the bubble algae away, they also eat algae. Chad maintains a tank with emeralds he uses to clean up frags. This is a photo example of what they do to the frags overnight, which is pretty amazing. We also added a couple peppermint shrimp as a general scavenger, as well as to keep aptasia at bay. While we were at it, we added some fun elements with a couple pom-pom crabs, some blotchianthias, and a Randall's goby with his friend the candy pistol shrimp. This tank is really starting to come together. I hope you were able to pick up something valuable related to cleanup crews today. If that's the case, give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on next week's episode, week 24 of the BRS 160, chemical filtration.